Hi everyone, I'm Ryan Middleswart, and I'm recording a video for a strategy that Casey Guillembardo asked me to talk about quickly that I've used in my classrooms called bucket questions, or sometimes we call it snowball fight. And I'll talk more about why that name might fit in a minute here. And this strategy is really an alternate questioning strategy designed to try to get more involvement. I'm sure you've probably experienced that moment in class where you ask if students have any questions and there's crickets, or you maybe get one student raise their hand and you get all excited and then they ask if they can go to the bathroom. I know I've experienced both of those situations many times. And so this strategy is real quick, but it's designed to, like I said, ensure all students are asking questions, and it also works really well if you have a topic that just takes a bit longer for students to process questions for, or maybe those questions are a little bit more potentially sensitive in nature dependent on the topic. And the basic idea is that you ask students on a piece of scrap paper to just design a couple questions that they have about whatever it is that you're wanting to get from them. And so an example I'll use throughout this just quick explanation, we do a Holocaust unit around the memoir Night by Elie Wiesel. And so before we get into that unit, we try to see what students know about the history behind what happened, so that we have kind of a foundation and framework that all students can work from. And so we like to ask initially, what questions do you have and what do you know about this topic? And that's a really heavy topic for anyone, for adults, for me, for other teachers, for everybody to ask questions about. And so students are really hesitant if you just open it up like, oh, hey, what questions do you have about this? Not many responses. And so this bucket questions was a good way to get some response from that. And so the bucket questions comes from the fact that when students have their scrap paper, they write the questions on it. I always tell them that not to put their name on it, so that also removes a little bit of the apprehension the students might have about asking questions. But I do tell them that their questions will be read aloud, so that way you try to keep a serious focus on it, so they know they can't just write whatever there. And so then you set up a bucket or a bowl or something in the middle of the room, and you have students try to throw their questions, crumple them up, and throw them into the bucket. That it adds a little kinesthetic activity to it. It makes the mood a bit lighter, so students are a bit more free to ask those questions and to then read them aloud. And so once you have everybody's questions in the bucket, you can either have students come up and each take one, just make sure that it isn't their own, and then everybody has some questions from their classmates to ask, or sometimes I select the questions and kind of read them myself, still representing the entire class, but just from a different perspective. And then you kind of go from there. If you want that to just be each question is a piece for discussion, you could do that. With the Holocaust unit I mentioned, we often catalog all the questions on the board to see if there are similarities that arise and what that could tell us about what we want to know going into that unit. It's like I said, really effective to get everybody involved, but also to give students a little more distance from being attached to the question, so they can ask what's really on their mind. And I think this is really student-centered, because I do always acknowledge, before I give them the strategy, that I know questions aren't always easy to ask, and that as teachers we say, hey, do you have any questions? We expect that we'll be flooded with them, and it's an easy thing to do, but it isn't, and especially if the topic isn't easy to talk about. And so it works really well for units like that, but just in general to kind of break up the idea of garnering questions from your students. So that's called bucket questions. Again, sometimes call it snowball fight because they're thrown into the bucket. You can call it that. But pretty good quick strategy that I've found some success with. Thanks.